Welcome back to Fusty Stories. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and get ready for another story you won't forget. Let's dive back to the story. Catherine Briggs had lived a life defined by sorrow and servitude. Orphaned at a tender age, she was taken in by her Aunt Margaret Briggs, who showed her no affection, only cold disdain. From dawn until dusk, Catherine was burdened with house chores that left her hands raw and her back aching. She cleaned, cooked, and labored like a servant in a house that was supposed to provide refuge. Margaret constantly reminded her that she was a burden, undeserving of love or happiness. In contrast, her cousin Sophia was adored and pampered, dressed in the finest clothes and treated like royalty. Margaret made it clear that Sophia was her pride and joy, while Catherine was nothing more than an unwanted guest. Yet despite her suffering, Catherine endured with grace. Her heart was gentle, and her spirit unbroken. She never complained, never retaliated, and never questioned her place in Margaret's home. The neighbors admired her resilience, but no one dared confront Margaret's cruelty. Catherine often wondered if life would always remain this cruel, if her existence would forever be marked by humiliation and rejection. But deep inside, she carried a fragile hope, a belief that perhaps one day, fate would remember her and lift her from the shadows she had been forced to live in. Margaret Briggs had one obsession: securing a wealthy future for her beloved daughter, Sophia. To her, appearances and social climbing were everything. Margaret turned away wealthy suitors who came for Catherine, mocking them for even daring to admire the orphan nobody. When distinguished men visited, they were chased off with harsh words and humiliation, as Margaret sneered, "What did you even see in Catherine? Can't you see my Sophia sitting right here?" To Margaret, Sophia deserved nothing less than the best, a man with riches, status, and power. Catherine, on the other hand, was destined for poverty. On the flip side, poor men who came hoping to marry Sophia were dismissed instantly. Both Margaret and Sophia laughed in their faces, ridiculing their lack of wealth and calling them unworthy. Margaret believed her daughter was a jewel too precious for ordinary hands, while Catherine was little more than dirt meant to be stepped on. The cruel favoritism became sharper each day, leaving Catherine humiliated and lonely. But Margaret's arrogance blinded her. She never considered that her scheming ways might one day backfire, leaving Sophia with nothing and Catherine with everything. Edward Hamilton was a billionaire who owned one of the most successful companies in the country. But despite his vast wealth, he was a man who preferred silence over attention, strategy over pride. One afternoon, while visiting one of his company's branches, his eyes caught sight of a striking young woman, Sophia Briggs, dressed in expensive clothes and moving with airs of superiority. Sophia captivated him at first glance. To Edward, she appeared confident, desirable, the kind of woman who could stand by a man of his stature. He made inquiries and quickly discovered where she lived. But Edward was no fool. He knew beauty alone could deceive. He wanted to test her character, to see if her elegance was matched by kindness. And so, he devised a plan to disguise himself as a poor, crippled man in a wheelchair. If Sophia could look beyond appearances, then she might truly be worthy of him. But if her heart was cold, then the mask would reveal the truth. It was a dangerous gamble. But Edward was determined to see who Sophia truly was before unveiling himself. Edward wheeled himself to the Briggs household in his disguise, looking disheveled and pitiful. His clothes were plain, his hair unkempt, and the wheelchair added an image of helplessness. When Margaret saw him at her gate, her face twisted in disgust. Sophia's reaction was no kinder. Together, they ridiculed him, mocking his appearance and condition. "Do you think you could ever belong here?" Margaret spat. Sophia laughed cruelly, tossing her hair with arrogance. They insulted him further, treating him as though he were less than human. The final blow came when Margaret ordered the maid to pour a bucket of dirty water on him, drenching him from head to toe. Sophia clapped her hands in amusement as Edward sat there, dripping and humiliated. Yet, amidst the cruelty, one person's heart broke for him: Catherine. Standing quietly by, she couldn't bear the sight of a man treated so wickedly. When no one was watching, she offered him a cloth, whispered kind words, and asked if he was all right. Edward's eyes locked onto hers, and in that moment he saw what he had been searching for: compassion. Catherine's gesture was small, but it pierced through Edward's heart. While Margaret and Sophia treated him like filth, Catherine's eyes held warmth. Her voice trembled with genuine care. She did not laugh at his condition, nor shrink away from his appearance. Instead, She gently encouraged him to stay strong. It was this tenderness that stirred something within Edward, a spark of admiration, perhaps even love. He realized that while Sophia's beauty had caught his eyes, it was Catherine's heart that captivated his soul. Edward returned home, that evening drenched but thoughtful. He could not forget the orphan girl who treated him with respect when her aunt and cousin had shown nothing but cruelty. Catherine had no wealth, no fine clothes, no standing in society, yet she had something Sophia lacked entirely: humanity. Edward promised himself he would not overlook Catherine. Perhaps fate had led him to that house not to find Sophia's true nature, but to discover Catherine's. Margaret, however, did not see Catherine's kindness as a virtue. Instead, she considered it an act of betrayal. To her, Catherine was a fool who had embarrassed the family by offering pity to a man so beneath them. Furious, Margaret decided Catherine must pay. "Since you like him so much," Margaret sneered, "you will live with him. You will never step foot in this house again." Sophia joined in the taunting, laughing at Catherine's fate. For once, Catherine tried to protest, tears streaming down her cheeks, but Margaret was relentless. With a single cruel decision, Margaret cast Catherine out of her home. She packed Catherine's meager belongings into a small bag and shoved her toward Edward. "She's yours now," Margaret mocked. "See if you can feed her." Catherine, broken-hearted, left the only home she'd ever known, forced to live with a man she barely knew, though Edward felt pain watching the injustice unfold. He said nothing, for he had already made a silent vow to change Catherine's life forever. Edward led Catherine to a tattered house on the edge of town. The disguise remained intact, and Catherine believed he was truly poor and crippled. Yet, when she looked around the shabby little home, she did not complain. Instead, she smiled weakly and said, "Thank you for giving me shelter." Edward was moved beyond words. Any other woman would have ridiculed the condition of the place, but Catherine's humility astonished him. She even began tidying up, determined to make the house livable. That night, Edward sat in his wheelchair, staring at her as she worked. He had never seen such quiet strength. Catherine could have run away, but she stayed. She could have cursed her aunt, but instead, she whispered prayers under her breath. Edward felt an overwhelming urge to protect her, to give her the life she truly deserved. Without hesitation, he decided he wanted her as his wife, not out of pity, but out of genuine love. Days later, Edward gathered the courage to speak his heart. "Catherine," he said softly, "I may not have riches, and my condition may not promise you much comfort, but I want you as my wife." Catherine's eyes widened in shock. She had never imagined a proposal coming from him. For a moment, she hesitated. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw sincerity, something she had never seen from anyone in her aunt's household. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Yes." Their marriage was simple, with no lavish celebration, only a modest dowry paid to Margaret. But even then, Margaret and Sophia mocked Edward. "Look at the man you chose," Margaret taunted. "A crippled beggar. You deserve each other." Catherine's cheeks burned with shame, yet Edward squeezed her hand under the table, silently assuring her that everything would change one day. Margaret had no idea that she had just rejected the opportunity of a lifetime. Meanwhile, Sophia's beauty and arrogance no longer attracted wealthy suitors. Word of Margaret's cruelty had spread, and no respectable man wished to be tied to such a family. The wealthy men who once came seeking Catherine no longer returned. The poor men Sophia dismissed had long given up. The tables had turned, though Margaret remained blind to the truth. She still clung to the hope that a wealthy man would one day appear for Sophia. But months passed, and nothing changed. Sophia's frustration grew, and Margaret's arrogance began to crack. Catherine, however, slowly found happiness in her quiet marriage, though she and Edward had little. Their small home was filled with peace, laughter, and respect, things she had never known in Margaret's house. Unbeknownst to Catherine, her husband's secret identity would soon change everything. Edward's company made a grand declaration. The CEO himself would be attending the annual Thanksgiving gala, and for the first time he would introduce his wife. The news spread like wildfire. Margaret and Sophia were thrilled, convinced that this was the opportunity Sophia had been waiting for. Margaret urged her daughter to prepare her finest gowns and jewelry, certain that Sophia would catch the CEO's eye. Sophia was ecstatic. She imagined herself walking hand in hand with a billionaire, while Catherine wasted away in poverty. But Catherine's life was about to shift dramatically. Edward, still in disguise at home, gently asked Catherine to attend the gala with him. "My brother has invited us," he said calmly, hiding the truth. Catherine, though nervous, agreed. She had no idea that the event would unravel the greatest revelation of her life and expose the cruel hearts of those who had mocked her. Sophia spent weeks preparing for the Thanksgiving gala. She purchased a new gown with shimmering sequins, visited salons daily, and practiced her smile in the mirror. She imagined the moment she would meet the CEO, how he would be captivated by her beauty, how Margaret would finally boast of her daughter's success. Margaret, equally delusional, pushed Sophia to polish her manners, though both women still carried the same arrogance that had ruined their chances before. Their greed had not lessened. It had only grown. Meanwhile, Catherine's preparation was simple. Edward encouraged her to wear a modest but elegant dress he had secretly arranged for her. "You look beautiful," he whispered as she hesitated, uncertain about standing in such a grand crowd. Catherine wasn't eager for attention. She simply wanted to support her husband, whom she believed was merely attending on his brother's invitation. She had no idea she was walking into an event that would shatter illusions and unveil truths so powerful that her life would never be the same. The gala hall glittered with chandeliers and echoed with laughter from the elite. Wealthy men and women in luxurious attire filled the room, sipping champagne and whispering about the anticipated arrival of the mysterious CEO. Sophia walked in with Margaret at her side, heads held high, certain that all eyes were on them. She relished the attention, preening as though the night was hers to own. Margaret whispered, "This is our moment," and Sophia nodded, convinced destiny was finally bowing to her. Catherine entered quietly with Edward, wheeling him through the hall. Dressed with understated grace, she attracted little attention at first. Yet some guests noticed her soft presence, remarking that she looked dignified despite her simple attire. Catherine, shy and unassuming, kept her head low. Edward leaned toward her and said, "Stay close, love. Tonight will change everything." His eyes glimmered with a secret that Catherine could not decipher, though her heart raced with unease. The evening continued with performances, speeches, and chatter, but the highlight was yet to come, the arrival of the CEO. Sophia positioned herself near the stage, ensuring she would be the first face he saw. Margaret busied herself whispering in wealthy men's ears, boasting of Sophia's beauty and virtue. Both women believed they were moments away from securing the life they had always dreamed of. Catherine, however, remained seated quietly as Edward had asked. "Wait here," he said softly, wheeling himself away. She wondered why he wanted her to stay behind, but she trusted him. As the lights dimmed and the announcer's voice boomed across the hall, Catherine's chest tightened. Everyone hushed, and anticipation thickened in the air. Sophia clasped her hands in excitement, completely unaware that her world was about to crumble. The announcer's words carried authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to present to you the CEO of Hamilton Enterprises, Mr. Edward Hamilton." The crowd erupted in applause, but the applause quickly turned into gasps as Edward wheeled himself onto the stage. Dressed in a tailored suit, commanding and composed, his presence filled the room. Catherine's eyes widened in disbelief. Her husband, the poor cripple she thought she knew, was standing revealed as the most powerful man in the room. Sophia's jaw dropped. Margaret froze. The man they had drenched with dirty water, mocked, and humiliated was not only their employer, but the billionaire they had hoped to win. Shock rippled through the hall as whispers surged. Catherine trembled in her seat, her heart torn between astonishment and fear. She had no idea her life was tied to such a man, and yet she felt a strange pride in knowing that beneath all the riches, he had chosen her. Catherine struggled to process the truth. Her husband was no poor man scraping by in a tattered house. He was Edward Hamilton, the man everyone revered and envied. Tears welled in her eyes as the realization struck. He had chosen her when she had nothing, when the world despised her, when even her own family had cast her aside. She had been married not to a burden, but to a man of unimaginable power. The crowd buzzed with curiosity. Many turned their attention to Catherine, murmuring about her quiet beauty, her grace, and the fortune she had stumbled into. But Catherine, still in shock, hardly noticed. She thought only of how her aunt and cousin would react, how their cruelty was now exposed for all to see. Her hands shook, but deep inside, she felt an ember of triumph begin to glow. Sophia could barely breathe. Her dream had shattered before her eyes. The CEO she had longed to marry was none other than the man she had mocked and scorned. Her arrogance crumbled into panic as she watched him speak into the microphone. Her lips trembled, and her carefully painted smile dissolved. "No, no, it can't be him," she whispered, but there was no denying the truth. Margaret tried to pull her upright, whispering frantic reassurances, but it was too late. Everyone was staring. The guests whispered and sneered, remembering the tales of Margaret's cruelty and Sophia's arrogance. For years, they had turned away wealthy men from Catherine, only to be disgraced by their own greed. Sophia's face burned red with shame. For the first time, she was not the object of admiration, but of ridicule. And it was only the beginning. Edward held the microphone with steady hands, his voice deep and commanding. "Tonight, I want to share a story," he began. The hall grew silent. "I disguised myself as a poor cripple and visited a household where I met cruelty like I had never seen before. I was mocked, insulted, drenched with dirty water, by those who judged only appearances. Yet in that same house, I met a woman whose kindness saved me, a woman who saw me as a man, not a beggar. That woman is my wife, Catherine Hamilton." The audience erupted in applause, many rising to their feet. Catherine covered her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks as Edward's words echoed through the hall. He looked directly at her, his eyes filled with love, and beckoned her to stand. Trembling, she rose, and the spotlight followed her. Gasps of admiration filled the air as everyone realized she was a wife of the powerful CEO. Sophia's humiliation deepened, and Margaret's knees nearly buckled. Edward's words struck like a dagger into Margaret and Sophia. He had not just revealed himself. He had exposed them for what they truly were. Guests exchanged knowing glances, some even chuckling at the irony. The very women who had scorned the billionaire now stood disgraced before the elite. Sophia's painted smile faded into sobs, and Margaret desperately tried to salvage dignity, muttering excuses under her breath. But Edward did not stop. "I will not tolerate arrogance and cruelty in my company," Edward declared. "And those who mock me in disguise will no longer remain here." His words carried weight, sealing their fate. Margaret and Sophia's world collapsed in that instant, their ambitions crushed under the truth. They had lost everything they schemed for, while Catherine, humble, pure, and despised, stood victorious without ever seeking power. Desperate and broken, Sophia pushed her way to the stage, falling at Edward's feet. "Please forgive me," she cried. "I didn't know who you were. I'll change, I promise." Her sobs echoed pitifully in the grand hall. Margaret joined in, pleading for mercy, her voice trembling as she tried to defend her daughter. But the audience only watched with cold satisfaction, their sympathy for Catherine stronger than ever. Edward looked down at Sophia, his face unmoved. "You showed me your true self when you thought I was nothing," he said firmly. "And now I cannot forget it." His rejection was final. Sophia's tears could not sway him, nor could Margaret's excuses. The same cruelty they had poured onto others now came back upon them, and there was no escape. The gala ended with a final unforgettable scene. Catherine stood by Edward's side, hand in hand, her tears replaced with a radiant smile. The crowd celebrated her as the true jewel of the evening, admiring her humility and strength. Meanwhile, Margaret and Sophia slinked away, disgraced and humiliated, their dreams of wealth crushed by their own arrogance. Sophia would forever regret mocking the man who could have been her salvation. Edward kissed Catherine's forehead gently and addressed the crowd one last time. "This is my wife, Catherine Hamilton, the woman who stood by me when the world mocked me." Applause thundered through the hall, sealing their triumph. For Catherine, it was the end of years of rejection and the beginning of a life filled with love and honor. For Sophia and Margaret, it was a bitter lesson they would never forget. That's all for today. Like, subscribe, and see you in the next episode. Stay tuned.